Hey everybody, welcome to the AP English Language and Composition podcast. My name is Eric Kallenborn. I am your host, coming from Shepherd High School in Palos Heights, Illinois. The second episode of the APE focuses solely on introductory paragraphs for the three types of essays on the AP English language test. I brought together some current AP juniors, and we just talked about their successes and failures so far this year and tips and tricks on what a good introductory paragraph looks like. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and once again, at the end, I'll have a little bit of an outro talking about next week's episode, and hopefully you will contact us with any questions or ideas you have for the show. So here you go, episode 2 of the APE introductory paragraphs. Here we go. All right, guys, we're live. Welcome to Shepherd High School, the APE podcast, AP English. I'm your host, Eric Kallenborn, teach AP Language and Composition with Mr. Jeff Azana here at Shepherd High School. So welcome to our second episode. This episode is all about intros. Everything intro you want to know or hopefully want to know, maybe we'll discuss today. And we want to focus on what a good introductory paragraph is, what a good hook does, styles and tips for intros for each of the three essays on the AP language exam. And I am joined here today by 4 awesome students. I have David.
What is up, ladies and gents?
I have Leanna.
Hi.
Mike.
Pleasure to be here.
And Shane.
How goes it?
All right, very well. So we want to thank you guys for being here, coming out and after school here and taking your time out to talk to us.
For sure.
We all appreciate it, and it's really cool of you guys. So we're just going to get right into this today and start talking about what makes a good introductory paragraph overall. And Shane, why don't we start with you and you just give us some feedback as to what you think is a good introductory paragraph.
I think a good introductory paragraph eases into the thesis by showing background knowledge and also things that everybody can relate to. And I think before you get into your body paragraphs where you're using sources and stuff straight from the essay, you should show off your intelligence and your background knowledge and state your key points and main ideas, but also leave a lot of room for development because the development is going to turn into your body paragraphs and essay as a whole.
Cool. Mike?
Well, see, for me, creativity is key. Specifically in the hook, I like to add a really creative hook so that you set yourself up for the rest of the essay, going off of this hook, and it really builds a solid foundation. Now, by creativity, I mean relating it to the topic or to the articles that you are writing about. Now, this could range from any sort of thing. Like, for instance, we just did an essay on space, wasn't it?
It was a 2009 synthesis essay on space exploration. What factors should we consider going forward?
And so I used, different transitions, a different sort of introduction where I said space, the final frontier. Maybe the reason it was the final frontier was because of all the money that we dumped into it to get it started. And I used different other Star Trek transitions, like we beamed ourselves up from this point and whatnot. And it just really, the creativity is what I like to approach when I write an introduction.
And I think that's something that an AP reader can appreciate when somebody takes the time to kind of link those things together. So you started off with this Star Trek hook, which I graded your essay, and I thought that it was a really cool opening, the way you started that. And bringing in a financial aspect and stuff like that was really neat. And then the tie-ins to the Star Trek throughout really kind of makes it one piece, and that was really cool. Leanna, what about you?
I like to write a bit more formally than Mike. I like to write very concise intros, and I find that in the intro, it's where your word choice is most important, because this is the first time that the grader is reading your writing. They don't know who you are as a person, and so I like to start off with using very concise words, maybe not the longest or most fancy, but I like to be very direct in what I'm saying. And I don't always do quite as creative of a hook. It's not really my style. But I do like to open with maybe a quote or some kind of statistic, maybe if it's a synthesis essay, something that relates to it. And I think that it's important in your intro because it gets, it sets the stage for your style as a writer. And so that's when I like to try to put my style in there because I do like to write more formally. So I like my intro to be that way. And if you do like to be a bit more whimsical like Mike, then I think it's definitely important that you get that in there in your intro so that you don't accidentally throw a joke in halfway through and the grader doesn't realize that that's your style.
Because it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like your style a lot when you're writing an intro too, because it's always like, we talked about this before, where that's the first thing your reader sees, the first couple sentences of your introductory paragraph, and if the sentences aren't constructed well, if your syntax is kind of off, it sets a first impression. And the fact that you go in like trying to be a little bit creative, but most importantly trying to be sound in your syntax, I think is really important for young writers out there to kind of make sure your sentences make sense before you start getting into that creativity. David, what do you think, sir?
Well, like what I like to do in my intros is like at like the space exploration essay that we just wrote was my first experience of writing a synthesis essay. I'd never written one before, and aside from that, like I like to try and be a smart aleck when I write, where I know what I'm talking about, but then I'm able to convey my ideas in like a kind of funny manner, because these AP graders are just like sitting there for, I think it's 8 hours just grading essays after essays after essays, and like to pull them away from that and like make them laugh a little bit at what you're writing, I think would get you a better score, because then they're like, oh, this kid's really funny, but then he also knows what he's talking about.
You want to take them on a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. AP readers on a journey.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do.
We went over an essay today in class, and it was about the space exploration. It was an example from that, and it was very, very satirical. And they were being like what you're saying, you're being very smart aleck-like. And they actually scored a 9 because it was just so creative. It was like poking fun at a lot of the faults of space exploration by like acting like it's completely fine. Like one of my favorite parts in it was they talked about the space race, and they said, I can't quite recall it, but it was something of, maybe they wanted to do this to ensure peace on Earth by having space exploration on both sides of the planet, when really we were just going at it. Like us and Russia were just going at it.
Go ahead, David.
Oh, I was going to say I really liked that essay too. Like, I thought that was phenomenal, because like it was all sarcastic and stuff, and then at the end their conclusion was like, oh, by the way, if you didn't understand anything I've said, this is what I meant, and it was still being sarcastic and amazing. Well,
the intro too, it kind of like hinted at being sarcastic, and then the last couple lines of that intro kind of hit you with that satire, and it's like, we are humans, we are the dominant species, and if something were to die because of us, it's survival of the fittest. And you're like, this kid really went out on a limb here. And you know, when we peer edited that essay in class today, I had a lot of students give it like a 5 or a 6, because I think there were a couple 4s even, because people were so taken aback and how creative it was. And they said, well, I don't agree with this. And it's not about what you agree with. It's about, does it answer the question, and does it make a good argument? And that essay definitely did. And from the intro, that person had me. And the syntax, the diction was great. The humor, it was fantastic. You know what? That's a great segue then. Let's talk about, we're talking about the 3 different types of essays and what makes a good intro for each of those. What do you guys think makes a synthesis essay introduction different than the other ones, and how do you go about that differently than Leanne? I'm going to start with you talking about this, because I know you talked about you tried to incorporate like a statistic because you have all those sources. Can you talk about what makes a synthesis intro different for you?
I actually find the synthesis intros to be the easiest ones to write, because when I'm thinking in terms of like a hook, I'm thinking in terms of what I can relate it to. And so I like to have my essay planned out, and I think about what my main point is going to be. And then I'll go into the text and I'll find a quote that relates but isn't something that I would want to use in a main body paragraph. I find that's a nice time to incorporate something. If you find it maybe compelling or something that's really interesting that just doesn't fit in with the content of what the rest of your speech is going to say, I find that's a good time to just put it in so that you can introduce the topic. Yeah. And you're establishing your credibility as well, because you're showing that you're educated about the topic. I find that in a synthesis essay, you need a lot more background information than you would need in, say, a rhetorical analysis essay, because you're discussing a specific issue or topic, and you need to show that you understand the topic before you can begin to discuss the pros and the cons of it. So you need to show your comprehension in the synthesis intro and make your stance very clear.
I know a lot of people worry about what we'll talk about hooks in a minute, but what hooks to use. And I think the synthesis essay, like I agree with you, it is probably the easiest because the hooks are in the sources. Like the sources are just filled with hooks, whether it be a statistic from a graph, whether it be an image that they give you in the images, or just one of the articles in there. I think it just helps you so much with, I'm going to pick, like you said, I'm going to pick something that I'm not going to use in my full essay. It's not going to be one of my body paragraphs. I just kind of splash this in the intro and kind of make a point. Does anybody else want to share what they synthesis essay? Mike, what about you?
Well, when I write a synthesis essay, having only written one, I definitely agree with Leanna in that, and I know this is contrary to what a lot of people believe, but I also believe that the synthesis is one of the easiest essays to write. And Leanna said, you do need a lot of documentation, you do need sources, but they give you all the sources for that. So when you write an introduction, of course you want the engaging hook, but you also want to identify and clarify the issue at hand, and you want to present it with a clear and direct thesis.
Very nice. Shane, would you like to take us into the rhetorical analysis introductory paragraph? How do you approach that? How is it different than the synthesis essay intro?
I think the rhetorical analysis, since it mainly reflects the author and what the author is doing, you need to analyze why they wrote this. You need to go to their purpose more, not their argument, but their purpose, and you need to describe their audience, like when they wrote this, why they wrote it, and then throughout, you're setting the structure for the essay, and then throughout it you relate to everything ties back to the intro, and you saying they wrote this because of this and this, and they wrote this to this person because of this, and the introductory sets that up because you want to always tie it back to the purpose.
So how would you say that would be different than the synthesis essay?
Synthesis and argumentative essays, both you're taking one side of the story, and in rhetorical analysis, it really doesn't matter the side of the argument. You're just explaining what the author did and why.
Okay. So we're going to get into hooks in a second. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm really curious as to what you guys use as hooks and where you like to go with that. David, what would you say about the rhetorical analysis? The rhetorical analysis is the one we've definitely done the most of.
Definitely.
Over the summer, we did 3 of them, and then at the beginning of the year, we did a couple of them. So we're more familiar with this one. So what would you say good rhetorical analysis intros do?
Well, what I'm discovering or learning or trying to do as a writer in writing my intros for rhetorical analysis is I'm trying to leave my intros not very general, but open to guide my essay, because I don't want my introductory paragraph to be so structured that it structures the rest of my essay. I like my essays to flow and kind of develop themselves as I write.
Do you like to take the reader on a journey?
Yeah.
Which is, we've already discussed
yeah,
this.
pretty much.
Okay.
Sorry, but what you're saying is if you put way too much into your introduction, you're not gonna have room to further expand throughout your body paragraphs, and it's gonna sound repetitive. And I think that's a distinct problem that most writers have, is they sound too repetitive.
Yeah.
You fall back onto it, because like I say, writing is hard. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's not an easy thing to do well at all. And one of the things that inexperienced writers do is they have a tendency of just repeating themselves, because it's kind of a stream of consciousness sort of thing that's happening.
Yeah.
I know I did that a lot over the summer when we were writing those essays, because I was coming out of honors English and freshman English, where they told us have a thesis, have a point, and then prove it with X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I was coming out of that, so trying to break that for a new writer is really difficult. And
yeah, for sure, because that's what you've been. I mean, we start writing essays or small papers, in grammar, grammar school, and they teach you the same way, because that's the 5-paragraph essay, and it's hard to break that. It's hard to no 5 paragraphs anymore? What? I don't understand what this is.
Exactly, because you were so used to this, organized structure, and now that you're in more advanced writing, you're breaking this structure.
And that's scary. You know, and some people it comes easy, and for some people it's extremely difficult. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, I still want to discuss the argumentative intro.
One more comment about the
Oh,
rhetorical analysis.
yeah, surely, yeah.
I find the rhetorical analysis intros to definitely be the hardest for me to write, because I find the rhetorical analysis, I do struggle with that one the most, because when you read through it the first couple of times, you might not fully grasp their purpose. And I find that as I'm writing, I start to understand more what the author was getting across. And I'm not sure if this happens to other...
Oh, here we go.
Attention Shepherd students, 5:30 activity
Our
buses
5:30
are
activity
by door
bus
12.
announcement.
Please proceed to door 12 to
Just
catch the
listen.
Now
5:30
everybody's going to know
activity
what
bus.
time we're doing this at. It's invasive of our privacy. They know what time they
No,
can
this
expect
is
it.
live. Guys,
This the
Hey man,
5:30.
if they're on the west or the east coast, they know that we're in the
It's-
central time zone. What's up, guys? on the
5:30
west
What's
and
up,
west?
Central Time Zone?
What's up?
Yeah, Illinois.
It's 5:30 somewhere.
Hey, it's Illinois, Mr. English teacher.
Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry, I
it's
forgot.
done. We've just been babbling. It stopped.
Leanna, I'm sorry, you were interrupted.
I find that with my rhetorical analysis, the most important thing to put into your intro is to state the author's purpose and the audience. Because I find that the rhetorical analysis essay, you're not talking about what the author said, it's how they said it. And so that's what's important for you to get into your introductory paragraph, is to get in what their purpose is, who their audience is, because you don't have an essay without those components.
Absolutely.
When you go to write about how maybe they use anaphora, you want to talk about what this did to their audience and how it achieved their purpose. And if that's not in your intro, then you're going to have nothing at all to guide you.
Yeah.
So even if your thesis may vary a little as you write it, you need to have those essential basics in.
And the rhetorical analysis, a lot of those prompts are speeches. You know, it's like in a speech
yeah,
delivered
for
to
sure.
this group of people, in a speech delivered on this date at this assembly. So you definitely have, if it's a speech, the audience is of the utmost importance, because nobody gives a speech to themselves. There's generally people. I mean, yeah, okay, yeah.
I mean, let's be honest.
If you've been to speech tournaments,
I
you've
talk
seen
to
kids
walls.
talking to walls. Yes.
Are you guys all in AP US history?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel like it's a lot like a document analysis.
Yeah.
Where you go through like the place and time it was written, the audience, the like the main idea, the reason, the significance. I feel like you use all that in your introduction, and that's like the basis, and then you use the rhetorical devices that they used to tie back to these A parts.
I almost
AP.
wish that AP US and AP language were like a blocked core class. Like I think
that'd be pretty awesome.
and the kids, I know the kids that are in APUSH really get a lot out of it coming into language, because I know all the students who are in APUSH, and you guys probably can talk to this too. We talked about it in the last podcast, where a lot of the examples for the argumentative essay and for the intro, that hooks in the intro, come from really cool historical examples that you guys learned in APUSH. So that's that. I don't want. We're losing a little bit track here, so I want to get back on track and talk about the
Argumentative.
the introduction to the argumentative essay, which is my favorite, of course. I've said that last week, of the essays. So how do you guys? Because it's so open. It's like, hey, talk about this idea
kinda
of
essay.
freedom, and then you just kind of go from there. So what is that intro, Mike? Why don't you take us on a journey of your argumentative intros?
David's job.
I look at it
It
this way.
is David's job.
Before I write an argumentative essay, I put myself in the position of the grader. Now, the grader is going to be asking these questions. What is this? What do you want me to do with this? And why am I reading this? So, what you want to do...
You know for a fact that the readers ask those.
every time.
Okay.
I'm
Out
best
loud.
friends with an AP grader.
Awesome.
No, I'm not. They're, like, old. Anyways, so what you want to do in your introduction, you want to set the context, use general information about the main idea. You want to state why the main idea is important and about what you're saying. Why is what you're saying important? Why should you believe what you're saying? You're arguing your side, so you want to make sure that the reader or the grader knows what side you're on and just why they should believe you.
So where do you put your What is your creativity that you spoke about earlier? Where does that come in the argumentative essay intro?
See, when I say creativity, I could mean anything. Like certain creativity could be satirical, it could be humorous, it could be with the hook. When I write an argumentative essay, I go with sarcasm. I really like to use sarcasm when I do it. Sort of, I set it up in a way where it just makes it sound, well, why wouldn't you believe what I'm saying. Because any other thing just sounds ridiculous after what I just said. I don't remember any specific examples offhand, but that's how I typically set those up. So I'm stating my position, while at the same time I'm saying everything else. Why would you want to go with that?
And that kind of ties into the space exploration synthesis intro, where when you read that kid's essay, you honestly feel like, well, why would you? Saying what you're saying in there, why would you think anything else?
Yeah.
You know, and that was one of the things that made it so strong, was that it was so strong in its stance, in its standpoint. It made a stand. It made a stand early in that introductory paragraph, and the kid just stuck to his or her guns when they wrote that essay. Anybody else want to weigh in on the intro to the argumentative?
I think it's important to address both sides completely, and you could either do it in like, this is why these people think that their idea is right, but really they're wrong because of this, or you can do what Mike said and just be like, these people think this, and this is just ridiculous. These people are wrong. So either way, you have to state both sides of the argument, because if you're just like preaching about one certain thing, you're just like, okay, why are they preaching about this one certain thing?
Right. So you definitely, and then you put that stuff into your rebuttal paragraph if you choose to use one of those.
Yeah, I think those are important. I think that an argumentative essay without a rebuttal paragraph is like some analogy that I can't think of right now.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
That's a real good
If you
one.
use sarcasm, the rebuttal is your best friend.
Oh, hands down.
Mm-hmm.
I think like the best way to write what argumentative essay intro is like. I personally think just be as bold as you can as soon as you can, because like that essentially will get the ball rolling. Like you get your points, you get your facts across, and then you start writing the rest of your essay. And if you keep that same level of boldness like we saw in the exploration essay today, you will do phenomenal. I mean,
if you also have the syntax and the diction to back it up, you know,
For sure.
you have to
Can't
first and foremost mechanics, right? It's the basics, it's the fundamentals. Get the syntax and the diction working, and then you can go out there and be bold and brave. And there may be some teachers listening to this that don't agree with that, and that's totally fine. You know, there are tons of different ways to build a house, and this is just a couple of the ways that we're talking about here. And we tend to like the creative and kind of funny and sarcastic. We don't shy away from it. But if that's not your thing, then that's not your thing.
yeah,
I can speak to that. That is not my thing. I may be the only one here that I find that sarcasm, it doesn't come across, like, it's not easy for me. The sarcasm doesn't just flow in what I write. I like writing an argumentative essay because I find that you have the most leeway with it. You can take it and interpret it however you wish, so long as you're answering the question. And we read an example of an essay, and the prompt was asking you to analyze the role of humorists in society.
Mm-hmm.
And we read an example intro of a student who scored very well on it. And the student spoke about not only how humorists are vital to a functional society, but also why humor is what it is, and discussed how humor is, like, to quote the person when someone says something and it's like, oh, no, you didn't. Like, it was a bit funny in the way they presented it, but they still had a sound argument, and they were making a lot more elaborate. I find that in an argumentative essay, it's crucial to have a more complex argument so that it doesn't end up being just you giving 3 examples of people that took risks and then succeeded.
Right.
So I find your intro to be that opportunity to develop your complex argument while still making it clear, because I do like to use concise diction, and so I like it to be clear, this is what you're saying, but you can add a little bit more. It's a lot more your opinion. It is argumentative, so I like to put that into your intro, that complex argument, to really make it you.
You said when you started out here, you were talking about how humor is not your thing, you know.
Yeah.
So when you, but I also gather by what you were saying that you don't mind reading it though. Like you understand that some people can pull it off. So did you score that? Did you score that first space exploration essay pretty high today?
I did not.
No.
Well,
Was that more of you kind of disagreeing with the stance the writer took, or?
I was a little unsure. Like I don't want to sound dumb, but I kind of got the feeling that they were being sarcastic, but I wasn't entirely sure. So I think if you're being humorous, like, you need to make it clear that you're being humorous. Like, if you do choose to go with the whole, you know, this is ridiculous, why would you believe this? You need to make it clear that you are showing that it's ridiculous.
Oh, it's hard. Humor is not easy, And sarcasm and irony is sometimes really hard to detect.
So hard.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to teach too, and we'll get into this a little bit later in the year, is how to detect that humor. Like, when do you know somebody is being funny and when you know they're being serious? And sometimes that line really makes things awkward for people. If somebody's trying to be funny and the audience doesn't get it because of whatever reason, they're not recognizing what's happening. It's all about recognition. If you recognize what's happening and what's being developed, then you can do that. But sometimes we just kind of let that go. So I can see that you would think that maybe this kid's being really serious.
When I recognize humor, I do appreciate it.
Leanna, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What could that author specifically have done to better allow you to recognize that he or she was being sarcastic or humorous?
I feel like they needed a little bit more serious to offset that they are being funny. Like, they were giving statistics and they were presenting them in a funny way. Like, what really got me to recognize that they were being humorous was when they made a comment about how it was something about how our health rates have improved so that now, like, 80% of children are surviving this certain disease, and that should be 100%. Like, more things like that where you clearly show your argument. Because I feel that sometimes when you try to be funny, you can lose the serious argument that you're making. And I personally believe that humor should be an accent and that your main arguments should still be clear. I think it's awesome if you can use sarcasm and irony and things like that in your paper, but I want it to be clear the stance that you're making, so it doesn't just become you trying to be funny.
It had a Jonathan Swift feel to it.
I was just about to say that.
A little bit. I give the writer props for being able to be consistent with that sarcasm, and that was when we read Why It Got a 9. It was because they were able to bring that wit and that sarcasm and that just that societal ill of how we view technology and space exploration throughout the entire essay, and started from the intro and then just stood its ground. Okay, David, you gonna say something?
Well, I was just gonna say, if you're out there, writer, mad props.
If you're out there, email.
We're just talking about your essay.
Email us.
We'd love to talk to you. So email me and we'll get you in a Skype chat with the class, and you can tell us what you were thinking. Maybe you were dead serious.
What's the email?
What's that?
What's the email? Let them know.
It's on you just got to click on the bottom underneath the YouTube page of the
autograph?
podcast, and then you can
click on the bottom.
Click on the bottom and message us or email me. That just goes for any questions you may have or comments you may have.
Pay a visit.
Yeah, join the podcast.
You can, yes, professionals and students, if you want to be part of this, absolutely contact me. You can be. Two more things before we part for today. You guys thank you first of all for all of you for being here. This has been really cool so far.
Taken away from my dinner, man.
I know. Go have another granola bar. Just have some water. Hooks. Right off the bat, what do you want? I'm going to hear briefly from each of you on this. What do you want your readers to know? What types of hooks do you like to use? Where do you get your hooks from? And let's start with Shane.
I think that most people mess up when they focus too much on a hook. They just sit there and they're like, how do I get everybody's attention? And generally hooks are definitely important because if you start out boring, nobody's going to want to read it. It's just going to seem boring. But I think that the hook shouldn't be your main priority in an introductory paragraph. I think you need a well-developed thesis and just a point that you can start on that you can just flow off of, and that will, getting good hooks will come with that. It'll come with practice.
Awesome. Mike?
Well, I like to use the acronym that I just made, CAV, which stands for Creativity, Originality, and Voice.
Wow.
Now, when I do write a hook, though, I would also implement humor, but only when it's acceptable. I mean, there's obviously going to be some topics that you might come across where...
We could put it after the C and do chav.
Huh?
Oh, chav.
Humor starts with an H.
All right, so remember that.
I'm going to write that at the top of my next essay.
Chav.
And if it doesn't meet that...
Creativity, humor... What's the O?
Voice.
Originality and voice. Voice is cool.
I think the most that anybody will learn from listening to this podcast is that humor starts with an H. That was a very brilliant statement. Thank you for that.
No problem. A lot of people don't know that.
Spelling counts.
Little known fact.
Oh, yeah.
Humor.
Well, does it?
Yeah, it does.
All right. So tell us a little bit more about chav.
Well, which part of chav?
The voice. You know, a voice is very difficult
voice
for young writers. So how do you, when we're talking about the V in the chav, how do you...
The V in the chav. Well, typically when I implement my voice, I'm very much like David said, in that sort of a sarcastic, witty type of personality. So I really like, I've said it before, I really like to use sarcasm. So when I try and, find my voice, I use a very ironic form of sarcasm where, it doesn't come across as something that should be funny. Like, Leanna would hate it because you can very often mistaken it for something. You could read it in a serious way and not know that it's joking. Although that... Never mind. I'm not going to say anything to insult
Which is
you.
why you're
No,
saying
I accept it. There are different writing styles, and
I was
there's no
going to
one
say,
that's
it's
better than another.
difficult to not understand that it's humorous or trying to be humorous because of how ridiculous it is.
Everybody has a different sense of humor, so I think that's where the understanding comes into play, because it might not match your certain sense of humor, so you just plain don't get it.
Exactly.
That is one of the toils of using humor. It's so subjective. Humor it's very subjective, and
Yeah, it can also be very controversial.
yeah,
like
yeah.
Jonathan Swift's thing.
Mhm.
Like,
Oh my god.
that was.
it's
I mean,
screwed
when
up.
I first read that, I was like, "This guy is an idiot."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Disgusting.
and then
I'm like,
I have-
oh my god, he's a genius.
I have a twisted sense of humor, and I read that and I'm just like so happy and overwhelmed.
What was funny about that?
Babies, yes.
I read it, a Leanna way, in that I read it with thinking that it was serious, but I still found myself laughing. I still thought it was funny, even if it were a serious, point of view,
Laughing at the absurdity if it was serious.
without even
Yeah.
realizing that it wasn't serious. So I think he definitely hit the nail.
I don't think we ever said the name of this. This is A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift.
Yeah,
So-
I'm sure. I'm hoping if you're listening to this, you know A Modest
Yeah.
Proposal by John. But you're right. We haven't said the title.
Yeah.
If you haven't read A Modest Proposal, you need to go do that,
That's
and
your
then
homework.
you can
Yeah.
use it as one of your examples or hooks for your intro, because it is. Yeah, it's made for the. He wrote it. He didn't know at the time that he was writing it for AP language and composition classes.
But he was.
But he was. Leanna, what about you and hooks? What do you think?
I
Coming from a more traditional standpoint.
Yeah, I think that the most important part of a hook is for it to not be forced, because sometimes you might go on there thinking, wow, I have this awesome story that relates to it, but then the more you write it, you might spend too much time on your hook, or you might start to lose that clear bridge between your hook and your actual thesis. So I think that it shouldn't be forced. And there are different types of hooks that you should use for each one. Like for the synthesis, I talked about how I like to open up with a quote or some kind of statistic that's from the actual sources, so that it's a nice, easy tie-in. And then I find rhetorical analysis intros to be the hardest, as I said, but I like to open up with prior knowledge about the time or the situation that that the piece was written or performed in, because I think that it sets the stage for what you're going to say. So I think that your hook needs to provide the background knowledge so that your intro as a whole has a nice balance of background knowledge and what your actual thesis is. And I think using stories, like a short story, like an argumentative essay, I think if you can do it well, it'll be nice. If you can have like some kind of short anecdote, but if it turns into your whole paragraph as just an anecdote, then you take it too far. I think that if you can write that well and find that balance between using the anecdote but not using it as a crutch, then I think that's awesome. But I would be careful with it. I like to just set up the situation. I am more traditional as a writer, so like argumentative, like if it's something about the humorous, then I would just talk about humor in general and use that to lead into what I'm saying.
I like what you're saying, and Shane mentioned this earlier too. When you guys you talked about like the hook, you shouldn't rely on a hook. I think you said that.
Yeah.
And Leanna, when you were talking about just being more traditional and not don't force the hook. I think for our more traditional writers out there that are just kind of finding their feet in AP, because for a lot of listeners, this might be their first and maybe only AP course, and they're a little overwhelmed. And I think don't feel the need to just get out there and force a creative hook or say something silly just to have a hook. You can write an awesome essay that just gets right to the point and doesn't have a fantastic hook. That comes with time. That comes with creativity. A little chav can go a long way when you're talking about creating a hook. But at the same time, young writers out there, do not feel forced to use a hook. Sometimes for you, budding writers, just getting to the point is what you need to do. David, talk about hooks.
Well, I'll be the first one to say I completely struggle with hooks. Like when I'm writing an essay, the thing I have the most trouble with is putting my words onto the paper. The very first sentence I write is always the hardest for me. And what I think I'm gonna do for my next essays is I'm just going to go straight to my thesis and then write my essay and then come back and see if I can make my hook creative after what I've written and see if I can tie things into it or something like that. Like, yeah, like what they said, don't force it. Try and be creative, but don't force it.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. You know, and once again, something we mentioned last week too, which you don't be afraid to try, is writing your intro last. Write your body. I've never tried it, but I'm always curious to try it. Write your body paragraphs and then save that intro so it can really embody what you've said. Write that last. All right, we're gonna one last question. I'm gonna hear from all of you briefly, and then we are going to depart. And that pretty much is just you reflecting on how have your intros gone this year, and what do you think moving forward you need to do differently to become a better introductory writer? We'll start with Mike.
Well, this year so far, I've been using Chav very often, and I understand that you and Mr. Vizana, when you grade these papers, you're grading so many papers, for all the kids. You don't really have a lot of time to individually critique every little bit of each essay. But one thing that I do get from my little comment from each time is typically good intro, great intro. And so the best advice that I could give to anyone out there, stick to Chav. If it's not your style, then develop it. And if you don't want to, you're like Leanna. I mean, I hate using you as an example.
That's okay.
That's fine too. But just make sure you can hone whatever skills necessary to you to get that intro out there, because it is the first impression.
And Mike, can you please repeat what Chav is for us?
It sounds like a Russian poet.
Chav, C, creativity, humor, originality, and voice.
Yes, very nice.
It's not a Russian poet. Don't worry about it.
I mean, it could be. But for the purpose of this, it's not.
We discovered in 3 months.
You can use Chav as your hook if he is a Russian poet.
Done.
And how he published, never mind. All right. Leanna, what about you? How's it gone so far, and what's one thing you think you need to become better at?
My intros have actually gone pretty well this year so far. I've gotten positive feedback on them. I think after sitting here and just discussing with a whole bunch of chavers, I think I want to start to more embrace my traditional writing style, because I don't want anyone listening to think that just because you don't use humor, your essay is boring.
Absolutely.
If you want to read my essays, I swear they're not boring.
They're
I want to
solid.
try to work on my word choice using more elaborate diction. Elaborating my arguments, too. I feel that, like in an argumentative essay, that one example, it stuck with me. We read that a couple of weeks ago, and that intro still stuck with me. And so I want to work on elaborating my arguments so that I can have a more successful essay overall.
Awesome. And, one of the things Leanna's talking about, not worrying, she's not super, quote-unquote, creative or funny in her essays, but her examples are so solid and well-developed that you don't even need it. David.
Yes.
Hooks.
Oh. All right, well, don't be...
Yes, not hooks, I'm sorry. Intros. What do you need to do better this year?
Well, definitely make them something that the reader is going to want to read. Don't have them be repetitive, boring, and very, stagnant. You know what I mean? They're there for a reason. They're there to introduce your paper and tell the reader what your paper is about. But don't make it so... I personally need to make it not so flat out, like, oh, my paper is about X, Y, and Z, and my thesis is boring because blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But I think I'm definitely going to try and change that by writing my actual paper first and then tying it back into my introductory paragraph and then possibly tying it into my conclusion if I happen to write that too.
Yeah, let me know how that works for you. I'm curious to see how that works. And Shane, what about you, sir? What are you going to work on for your intros for this year?
I need to develop my intros more. I need to, literally work on everything, because I find usually I'm not worried about the introduction or the conclusion because I'm timed. And I need to, become a quicker reader and analyzer, because, I'm good at writing. That's my strong point, is, writing and communication, but reading and analyzing is something I need work on. So I believe that once I can get it, get the prompt, get the essay, read through it, blow through it, understand it. Then once I have more time, I'll have a better intro. Because when I'm not timed, my introductions are great, and I have an attention getter and all this, and I'm a artist, I'm a creative person. So I think I need to both be like Mike, the right brain thinker, and add more creativity and chav, and then also be like Leanna and be like, I know what I'm talking about. And develop more with background information and knowledge and show off
So the
my
middle ground,
intelligence.
in other words.
Yeah, exactly. I want to, like, being in this podcast, I've learned from all of you, and now I just want to take this information and just use it to make a solid
Don't forget about
introduction.
me going on a journey.
Oh, yeah,
and take
you
them
can
on
go
a journey.
journey.
Take that from David.
Of
It's
course,
little
of
pieces
course.
from
I'll
everybody.
be like the dragon in those cartoons, taking them all over the place.
All right, and on that note, listen, guys, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Shane, Mike, Leanna, David, thank you guys for being here.
It's good to be here.
And
Yeah,
cool.
anytime.
And we thank you guys for listening, and hopefully you'll be hearing us next time.
Question marks?
Hopefully we'll
Peace
inspire
out from the
change
Ape.
lives.
See ya.
All right, that was introductory paragraphs. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the AP English podcast. Next episode in 2 weeks, we will be talking about the 2011 synthesis essay about the locavore movement. I'm going to be having some Socratic seminars in my classroom and my colleagues' classroom, and we're going to record them. And I'm going to be playing you excerpts of the students talking about the sources from that particular synthesis essay. I'll explain more about what the Socratic seminar is next time in my introduction, if you do not know what that is. But if you want to, students and teachers, if you wanted to prepare to follow along with the podcast, once again, for the next episode, which will be airing in 2 weeks, we will be discussing the 2011 synthesis essay about the locavore movement. So if you have any ideas or thoughts, once again, please email me, and thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.